Welcome to the first episode of Build to Perform Transforming Fitness with Athlene Nutrition. Today marks a milestone because this is the first time we are featuring insights from one of the leading experts in fitness and performance worldwide. I'm your host, Air Hernaez, and today we will dive deep with none other than Dr. Pat Davidson. Let me introduce our guest, Dr. Pat Davidson. He has a master's degree in strength and conditioning and a PhD in exercise physiology. Dr. Davidson has educated and developed some of the top personal trainers, rehab professionals, strength and conditioning coaches, and competitive strength athletes in the world. In addition to a background in academics, coaching, and personal training, Dr. Davidson has also competed as a professional fighter in MMA, has qualified twice for the World Championships, and represented Team USA in Strongman at the Arnold's Classic, and is now pursuing a career in bodybuilding. Today, we'll explore the significance of muscle growth beyond aesthetics, focusing on its benefits for overall health, the science behind muscle development, and discuss various training and nutrition strategies to optimize muscle growth. Hi, Dr. Davidson. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Your expertise is greatly appreciated, and we're excited to dive deep into this topic with you. Muscle is often associated with bodybuilding legends like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ronnie Coleman, and Jay Cutler. However, its significance extends far beyond just aesthetics. So, before we get into details, could you help us understand why muscle is so crucial for everyone, not just athletes, but anyone striving to lead a healthier lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, you can look just straight at the data that we have at this point in time. As far as all-cause mortality and activities of daily living, maybe 15 years ago, the only thing that really got discussed was aerobic fitness and VO2 max. And those are still very relevant factors. There's probably no greater predictor of death than the VO2 max, but muscle tissue has been slowly and steadily making its way into the research world's understanding of importance. And it's very clear that the more muscle tissue someone has, the more that they're able to just prolong their ability to live a healthy and an active life later in stages of life. It really comes down to, in my mind, in a lot of ways, just like we're all animals on this planet. And if you are demonstrating that you are a viable, strong animal, you're harder to kill in a lot of ways. You're less likely to succumb to disease. If you fall, you're less likely to fracture a hip. You're just a lot more. You're safer in a world that has a lot of ways that it could potentially kill you.
That's an incredible perspective. It's clear that muscle tissue plays a significant role in extending healthy and active living, which is a compelling argument for strength training at any age. So, given this, what would you recommend as a starting point for someone who is new to strength training later in life? Are there any specific strategies or exercises that are particularly beneficial for older adults to build and maintain muscles safely?
At every age group examined, there's clearly the ability to add muscle tissue and experience positive adaptations as soon as people start resistance training, and really from as little as like 2 times a week, just doing some basic exercises. You really don't have to make it your entire life to be able to experience most of the positive results from incorporating resistance exercise into your overall organism. It's practically bare minimum that people need to put in. And the positives are just unbelievable in every way that you could imagine, whether we're talking about, bone health, the ability to move better, your psychology, your emotional state. There's, if we could build a drug that was as effective as exercise, as effective as resistance exercise, it would be the greatest breakthrough in medical history.
It's amazing to know that how even minimal resistance training can lead to such significant improvements across different aspects of health and well-being. So, Dr. Davidson, could you clarify what you mean by bare minimum in terms of resistance training? Specifically, how often and how intense should someone's workout be to achieve positive results?
Yeah, it's hard to exactly say, but generally speaking, I would say that, resistance training twice a week is probably it. And then doing, movements that would target the major muscle groups of the body, the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, the chest, the shoulders, the back. Those are probably the real big rocks in terms of some kind of a movement that's squatting, some kinds of a movement that's hinging and pushing and pulling. If you're doing that and you're getting at least 1 to 2 solid effort sets in per session for those muscle groups, then you're probably checking the boxes that need to be checked for health and for function, to be able to have to really experience some unbelievable benefits from incorporating resistance training in your life.
So take note. Resistance training twice a week, targeting major muscle groups with movements such as squatting, hinging, pushing, and pulling is key. Just 1 to 2 solid sets per session for these muscle groups can cover the essentials for both health and functionality, leading to impressive benefits from resistance training. Apart from the physical benefits, we are also interested in understanding the role of muscle in supporting our metabolic patterns and maintaining a healthy body composition. Dr. Davidson, can you share with us how having a higher muscle mass influence our BMR? What does this mean for someone looking to maintain a healthy body composition and managing their weight?
Right. So the larger that you are as an organism, the higher your basal metabolic rate is going to be. And muscle tissue is slightly higher at rest as compared to, more inert tissues like fat or bone or something like that. I think that there's a bit of an overblown notion that like, oh my God, the real benefit from muscle tissue is this resting metabolic rate that's going to skyrocket and burn fat like crazy. That's not really, I don't think, how I would view it. But what it really provides from a metabolic standpoint is this unbelievable reservoir for blood glucose to potentially go into. It's like a sink or a sponge for blood glucose. If you have a substantial amount of muscle tissue and you use it, you will direct blood glucose into that muscle tissue. And, from a metabolic standpoint, when you talk about like metabolic syndrome X, whatever it gets coined, most of that surrounds itself with diabetes and blood glucose management. So, the more muscle tissue that you have, the greater the ability to extract blood glucose from the blood, pull it into a cell, reduce the presence of insulin, and experience or not experience a lot of the downsides of excessive blood glucose and excessive blood insulin existing for too long a period of time.
That makes a lot of sense. So, having more muscle tissue helps effectively manage blood glucose levels and reduce the risk of metabolic issues like insulin resistance and diabetes. That means that during exercise, muscle actually utilize glucose from the bloodstream and store it as glycogen for energy. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. They're doing it during exercise, and even if just a simple thing is like if you eat a meal and then you go for a 10-minute walk after, you're going to pull, so much blood sugar into the muscle cell. It's unbelievable. I know there's the drug metformin is one that increases the movement of glucose going into cells, but a 10-minute walk postprandial is twice as effective as metformin from the standpoint of drawing blood glucose into muscle cells.
Isn't it great how something as simple as a walk after a meal can have such a powerful impact on managing blood glucose levels? It's a great reminder of how small everyday actions can make a big difference in our health.
Really, like
Reduce.
if people go for a 30-minute walk 5 times a week and they lift weights twice a week with some level of effort, we're going to solve for 90+% of the health problems that plague modern society.
Dr. Davidson, we often get fixated on aesthetics and feel frustrated when we don't see immediate physical changes. But knowing that these habits are working wonders inside our bodies, regardless of whether we're seeing those changes on the outside, can be incredibly motivating. Just imagine how much more we could benefit if we put even more effort into building muscles and enhancing our overall health rather than just focusing on aesthetics.
It's tough. I do think we're a very visual animal. Uh, and the other thing is that most of the things that we do to improve ourselves are done to improve reproductive success. And when like years and years ago, before glasses were fashionable, nobody wanted to wear glasses even if they couldn't see. Nowadays, people are very much willing to wear glasses. They're a fashion statement in some ways, but it's because they made them look good. So it's really, but things that happen like well past your reproductive time are oftentimes ignored, or if something doesn't really facilitate an improvement in that regard, it's oftentimes ignored. Like, flat feet, for instance, are technically a problem from a podiatry standpoint, but nobody's really going out of their way to correct for that necessarily. But if you've got a zit on your face, there's 8 million products that people are going to purchase to be able to solve for that. So it's something to be known, and it's understood. People that really examine like evolutionary drive in humans, like that's the reason that we do most of the things that we do is to kind of improve our ability to be good billboards from a reproductive standpoint. And if something doesn't kind of fit in line with that, chances are that we don't do it. We don't have follow through. There's not a strong enough motive. So, sometimes you have to understand what motivates people to do things. And if it is aesthetics, then you kind of have to push that button to a certain degree to motivate people to be able to go down that avenue and in the right age group. So I do think that we're seeing a population of younger people now more and more that are exercising and lifting weights, partly because it's just much more socially accepted. And for young women, I think it's just much more normal nowadays and considered attractive to be fit and strong. And I think that's probably going to be a bigger push to get people to adopt these kinds of behaviors than actually preaching to them about health. I don't know if people care enough about that or if it changes behaviors enough to necessarily focus on.
You've made a point about how our evolutionary drives influence our behaviors and perceptions. It's true that our visual and societal norms heavily shape what we prioritize and how we act. It's also fascinating how societal shifts can make fitness and strength training more mainstream and accepted, especially among women. Witnessing how perceptions have shifted from the pre pandemic era, where many women in the Philippines, for example, avoided the gym due to cultural beliefs, to now seeing a vibrant, diverse group of women embracing strength training and fitness. This outdated notion that lifting weights could impact fertility is a belief held by some older generations here. It is always and still being challenged and debunked. So, education is key to overcoming these myths and empowering women to pursue fitness without fear or restriction. It's actually exciting to think about how this evolving mindset will continue to inspire positive changes and break down outdated barriers. And if we could focus on what resonates with people, whether it's aesthetics, empowerment, or confidence, we might see even greater adoption of healthy habits.
I think there's been probably not that many great things to come out of extreme social media use, but I do think that normalizing the gym and lifting weights for young women has been something that has occurred from it. And once that genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in, so to speak. And all of the kinds of like stories that we've told ourselves from older generations, they don't last too long after you see videos of attractive people lifting weights and young men and women getting together at the gym and stuff like that. Boom, it's all out the window, and nobody's going to be staying at home cooking and cleaning after they see some of those things.
100%. The shift in perception brought about by social media has indeed played a significant role in normalizing strength training and fitness for younger generations and women. It's amazing how seeing fit and strong individuals in different contexts can challenge stereotypes and inspire more people to embrace these positive habits. So, on that note, I'd like to dive deeper into the science behind muscle growth. Could you break down the key physiological processes involved in maximizing muscle gains? Understanding these mechanics can help us optimize our approach to resistance training and achieve, best results.
Sure. I think that sometimes people can get lost in the mechanisms. And, when you get into the mechanisms of muscle growth, you're talking about protein transcription and protein translation. And that happens from the nucleus to the ribosome and, gathering amino acids from around the cell and all those kinds of things. And ultimately that is the what it's all based on. But, it's been a difficult process scientifically to try to unpack the factors that really escalate protein synthesis and prevent too much protein degradation, because it's always this turnover that you're talking about. Like you're breaking down old proteins and you're building new proteins. But when you're able to slow degradation and speed up building new ones, that's when you see this real proliferation of growth take place. So there's all a million theories over the years as to what causes that and drives it faster. One that was really dispelled about 10, 15 years ago was the hormone hypothesis. When I was studying a master's degree and PhD, the main thing that everybody focused on was what causes a testosterone response, what causes a growth hormone response, what spikes your insulin-like growth factor. And eventually they figured out, well, that doesn't really matter. Whatever workout causes the biggest growth hormone response is irrelevant for what drives muscle growth. So all of the research that went into that area, it's not that it's pointless, but the protocols that led to that, which, we used to preach, it was, compound exercises for 3 sets of 10, basically, with about a minute rest between sets. That's what's going to spike your hormones to the highest level. And that's what a lot of people did, shorter rest, go, squat till you puke practically. And what they discovered was, wow, we're actually just seeing a human stress response. Like it's just a horrible thing to do to somebody. And this is how you would respond if you were being chased by a tiger. So they kind of discovered, well, that's not really it. And so then it's sort of like, well, what drives it? And probably the place where most people are sitting nowadays is that tension, just the muscle creating a threshold level of tension is the primary stimulus for growth. So, people are like, what does that mean? Like you're squeezing your muscles as hard as you can? No, it doesn't really mean that. Like muscles create tension in response to external loading. So the heavier the load that's placed on the muscle, the more that the muscle creates tension. But it's not necessarily like just the weight. It's really the it's the torque that's put onto the muscle tissue itself. And that's the combination of the weight, but also the distance that the weight is away from the rotating joint. So for instance, like if you had to hold, a screaming baby, you would hold it really close to your body. And it would be a lot easier to hold that as compared to straightening your arms out and holding the baby as far away from you as you could. That would be a much greater challenge. There's a lot more torque that's placed on the muscle tissues when the baby gets pushed really far away from you. So, things like, if you are squatting, for instance, you see most people just not squat very low. And the reason that they're doing that is because their knees never move far enough forward. Their hips never move far enough backwards. The deeper that you squat, the more that your hips and your knees move horizontally further away from you, and the more torque gets placed on the muscle tissue. So, the muscles respond to torque. That's the primary thing. And in most exercises, the deeper that you go into the stretch, the greater the torque that gets put onto the tissues. So, we've seen a lot of research on, exercising in the stretched position or the lengthened position being this real big driver of growth. And I think that ultimately what we're seeing is just that certain exercises, create a relationship where the deeper the stretch, the greater the torque. And the greater the torque, the greater the resultant tension that the muscle has to create.
Dr. Davidson, you've highlighted some crucial points about muscle growth and the science behind it. Just to summarize everything, first, muscle growth involves complex processes like protein transcription and translation, where proteins are built and broken down. Basically, effective muscle growth requires slowing protein degradation and enhancing protein synthesis. Next, earlier theories focused heavily on hormonal responses like testosterone, growth hormones, to really stimulate muscle growth. But recent studies have shown that these hormonal spikes are less critical than we previously thought. And third, current understanding emphasizes that creating significant muscle tension is the primary focus for muscle growth. This involves not just for the weight lifted, but also the mechanical stress on the muscle, which is influenced by the load and the distance from the joint. And lastly, exercises that place the muscle under greater tension, particularly in stretch or lengthened position, are more effective for stimulating growth. For example, deeper squats create more tension by increasing the distance the weight travels and the stress on the muscle. Given this, I'm curious about how you approach exercise selections in a training program. Are there particular exercises or techniques you rely on to maximize the muscle tension and achieve optimal muscle growth? Or does it really depend on individual factors like strength, mobility, and goals?
It's probably not very individual, to tell you the truth. So when I'm thinking about, I've created a model that I use, and the model is completely built around this idea of how much ground is in the exercise. And I define ground as the combination of external support and feedback that you're getting to let you know where your body is in space. So some exercises are just way more supported than other exercises. For instance, like a hack squat has a tremendous amount of support. It's got a back rest, a head rest. It's got, a foot plate. It's got handles for your hands. It's on tracks. It goes up and down. It really helps. The more that the exercise is supported, the more that it's going to hit the target tissue. So the target tissue is the quads and the glutes. You almost can't miss the quads and the glutes with a hack squat. If you compare a hack squat with, let's say, like an open space split squat with dumbbells, people can do that split squat with dumbbells in a million different ways that could miss the target tissue. So whenever I'm thinking about building tissue, I want to support the exercise as much as possible. I want it to be a higher grounded exercise. So, oftentimes that will mean machines, things like a leg press, things like a hack squat, a pendulum squat. A Smith machine is a great tool as well. So when people are using that, oftentimes it's just like I've watched a million people exercise, and the way that people move and do things is kind of unpredictable and unknown. And oftentimes I don't know what muscle they're going to work if they're left on their own to just do it themselves. So I think that people need to start with more supported, more structured exercises that hit the muscle. And that now it gives them a sense of what it actually means to hit the muscle. And then you can take away support as somebody becomes really competent and knows what they're doing, and they have more freedom to train in more different ways. But, most exercises that are compound exercises that are well supported, if the person is going through a nice deep stretch in the range of motion, it almost always is something where there's more torque placed at the bottom of the exercise in the stretch position. For instance, with the hack squat, the lower that you squat, the more that your knees push forward. And the farther that your knees push forward, the more torque is put onto the quads, and the more tension the quads have to create.
So, the level of stability and precision machines and supported exercises offer can make a significant difference, especially for targeting specific muscles. And the controlled environment provided helps us ensure that the exercises are effective and minimizes the risk of improper form, which can be particularly useful for beginners or for those people who are looking to refine their technique. So does this mean that machines are superior to free weights?
I think that when I'm saying this, I'm talking about the probability that the person is going to hit the target muscle. And I think that if someone is a highly skilled, highly practiced lifter with an incredible mind muscle connection, they could get the same results in a million different ways. But if someone is new, if someone doesn't really know what they're doing, the more that I take away the possibilities that they could do it wrong, the more likely that they're going to hit the targets for that exercise. And in order to make a muscle grow, it has to be targeted. It has to be fatigued. It has to, like, the exercise needs to end with that muscle being the rate limiting factor. And again, like, I've personally trained people for years. I've watched athletes work out. Most people are just not that great at exercise, to be honest. It's kind of, the movements are all over the place. It takes a lot of coaching. And when I ask people, hey, where'd you feel that exercise? Half the time they don't know, or the other half of the time they point to the wrong muscle. So it's like, ooh, let's make life a little bit easier. And also, even for experienced people, when you get into a high quality piece of equipment, oftentimes you can work that muscle closer to a failure point, just really make inroads into recruiting and fatiguing as many motor units as possible.
Break muna tayo sa kaka-English. Wait lang. Hindi. Sige, tatagalog na lang ako Okay lang. Before anything else, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our future episodes. Now, going back. English na ulit. So, Dr. Davidson, just to clarify, for beginners or those who are still developing their technique, using high supportive exercises or machines can definitely help in hitting the targeted muscles more effectively. It reduces the chance of form breakdown or muscle groups compensating for each other, which can happen most of the time for free weights or, the less supported exercises. And for experienced lifters, while they might have better mind muscle connection, machines can still offer significant benefits. It basically allows for more precise control over the movement, ensuring that the targeted muscle is worked effectively, especially when pushing towards failure. This so this approach helps in fully recruiting and fatiguing the muscle, which is basically crucial crucial for growth. Talking about failure, Dr. Davidson, how can you accurately gauge whether you're training close to failure? It can be quite challenging, especially when you're working out alone. It's common for people to believe they've reached failure when they actually have several reps left in the tank. This discrepancy often arises because it's hard to gauge your own limits without immediate feedback from a coach. Even with online coaching, where instructions are given from a distance, really tough to judge if you're really it's tough to judge if you're really pushing your limits. Do you use any specific techniques or tools to assess your proximity to failure during your exercises? How do you actually ensure that you're pushing yourself to the limit?
Well, this is actually what I personally spent a ton of money on and built an app to be able to tell people. The app that I built is called Partner Fit, PARTNRFIT. It's on the Apple App Store. And what it does is you use your phone, you use the camera of your phone with the app, and it measures the velocity of your reps as you're going. And once you hit a critical drop off of your velocity in the exercise, it starts indicating that you're doing effective reps. Because the real tell is the speed of the implement slowing down in an involuntary manner. Like you're working as hard as you can, and the implement is now moving substantially slower through space. And most of the time, people are bad judges of that. They just can't adequately assess that on their own. But if you're using this app that I made, now it'll show you. Like, you can watch it on selfie mode, and you can see the velocity of the reps beginning to drop off. And then after the set, you can take a look at what actually happened, and it will show you how many reps you did that were slow enough. And at the end of the set, if you hit proximity to failure, and how many reps you got within proximity of failure. And then it'll track that number across the week to be able to tell you if you've done enough sets to be able to stimulate muscle growth for that muscle.
That's actually an innovative solution to a common challenge in training. So, using velocity as an indicator for proximity to failure is actually a very, very, very smart approach, given that subjective assessments can often be off. I'm curious about the impact of form on hypertrophy. If you maintain perfect form but still have 6 to 8 reps left in the tank versus using suboptimal form but reaching close to failure, which approach is more effective for building muscles? Does this proximity to failure outweigh the importance of maintaining perfect form in terms of hypertrophy?
Suboptimal form getting close enough to failure, no question.
So
There's a
that
lot of
means,
jacked people that don't have the best technique in the world, but they work really hard.
yeah.
If you don't check that worked hard enough box, everything that you're doing is pointless.
So, getting close to failure is crucial for muscle growth, but it's important to balance that with proper form to avoid injury. While some highly developed individuals might have less than perfect technique, their intensity and proximity to failure play a significant role in their progress. However, it's vital to push yourself hard enough to stimulate growth, but not at the expense of safety. Proper form ensures that the effort is directed effectively at the target muscles without risking long term damage. How do you personally strike that balance between pushing hard and maintaining safe, effective form in your own training?
Correct. So it's kind of a fine line that you have to walk. And I again, like I invested into building something. I took 7 years of my life to create something that I thought was really valuable for people, particularly like you're talking about. I train alone. I don't have a training partner, and I need to be able to assess what I'm doing. I care about it to the highest degree possible. I want to compete in a physique sport, and so I need to know if every set did what it was supposed to do. So, that's really why I built it. Like, you can push too hard and too far sometimes if you're, just completely crazy, like I can be, like some people can be, that make this their life. And if that's the case, somebody needs to rein you back in. For the rest of the people, they need a push to be able to get there. And, so most people aren't hurting themselves in the beginning because of their effort. They're probably hurting themselves because they don't follow any kind of a program. They do, too many sets on day. Even if the sets aren't great, it's just like they went from 0 to like, way more than they should have. Most injuries are probably the result of load management errors and programming errors than they are the result of like this tremendous biomechanical error that they are committing during their reps.
So, Dr. Davidson, for most people, starting with a structured program and gradually increasing intensity is key to avoiding injuries. Many overestimate their capabilities and dive into too much volume or intensity too quickly. There's a lot of discussion around how frequent one should change their training program, with many programs involving different adjustments in volume, intensity, exercise selection, and other variables. It can be challenging to determine the right timing for these changes. How do you determine when it's appropriate to change a training program? For example, some people change their routines every couple of weeks, while others may not fully explore their current program before making a switch. What factors should be considered to decide when a program change is necessary or beneficial?
Yeah, I think that for people who are pretty serious about this, like when you're talking about just like a lot of times regular people or people that are just trying to get into it, I almost don't care. Like all this stuff is almost irrelevant. Like just get them in there, get them going. If they like it, perfect. They're, the error width is enormous for people that are just starting and that are beginners. But if someone's like serious and they really care about being able to move towards best development, I do have an approach that I subscribe to. I do believe in a periodized approach, but the periodization is almost more the nutritional periodization paired with training schemes. So, there's a time and a place to use progressive overload and to drive, multiple mesocycles put together for best results. And there's really 2 times for that. One is during a calorie surplus and the other one is during a calorie deficit. So if you're in a calorie surplus, this is the time where you can actually grow muscle tissue. Like I didn't really get into that before, but you're going to be hard pressed. It's going to be damn near impossible for you to really grow muscle tissue unless you're in a calorie surplus, regardless of what you're doing. And the only way that you know that you're in a calorie surplus is if you're gaining weight. Okay. And if you're gaining weight, there's going to always be a combination of muscle tissue, fat tissue, glycogen, fluid, bone, on and on and on. It's a mixed bag of what you're gaining. But the main things that we care about are muscle and fat, and you don't want to get too fat while you're gaining. And so, I use a skin fold measurement system every week, and it's a 7-site thing. I'm not using it for body fat percentage estimation. I'm just collecting the sums for the people that I work with. And when your sums begin to approach like 80, 90, that's usually the end of where I want you to go in terms of your surplus diet. Like beyond that point, you're probably putting on excess body fat more than you should be. And it's just going to make it that much harder and worse when we go into a calorie deficit and extend that period of time out. But for most people, somewhere between probably 16 and 24 weeks is how long I would keep you in a surplus. And that would be a time period during which I don't particularly want to change your exercises. I want you to keep the same exercises, and I want to progressively overload those exercises across that time period. Even if we get into the protein synthesis mechanistic stuff when it comes to movements, you first, when you begin a new movement, you're recruiting different motor units, different muscle fibers, all that sort of stuff. It takes about 6 weeks. Up to that point, the only things that you're doing is you're neurologically learning a new movement, and then you're putting down structural proteins. After that, about 6-week period of time, now we're really beginning to focus on building contractile proteins, and that's the stuff that people care about. That's the real dry protein tissue that's going to be more true muscle tissue. And so that only kicks off around week 6, and then that can continue on, for the next potentially 12, 14, 16 weeks, 18 weeks, something in that ballpark. I don't think we really know for sure, but I do think one of the biggest errors that people make is varying their exercise selection too frequently. You really have to stick with the same ones. And I think most of the great bodybuilders in history have kind of found the few exercises per muscle group that they've liked, and they've stuck with those for long periods of time, and they've added load and reps and sets in various ways to be able to progressively overload.
You've highlighted an important aspect of effective training: consistency and progression. For serious lifters, sticking with a structured approach and focusing on periodization, particularly in relation to nutritional status, is crucial for muscle development. As you mentioned, being in a calorie surplus is key for muscle growth. I also agree that changing exercises too frequently can hinder progress, especially since adapting to new movements does take time. Maintaining consistency with a select few exercises while progressively overloading them can actually lead to better long-term results. And to effectively apply progressive overload, we can focus on several strategies, such as increasing the weight lifted, enhancing the volume through more sets or more reps, and improving range of motion during the exercises.
Yes. Which is ultimately typically torque, which is tension. So it's
Dr. Davidson, what are your thoughts on using intensifiers such as drop sets, myo reps, and pre-exhaustion techniques? How effective do you find these methods for enhancing muscle growth and training intensity?
Yeah, I think that, as people get advanced, it gets more challenging to actually challenge the muscle tissue enough. And so that's when these things come into play. Like, I think that oftentimes the wrong population is overly focused on this stuff. And for most people, it's kind of like, hey, just straight sets with progressive overload, like getting close to failure. There's no reason to even fail for most people. Get close and then, just add progressive overload from there without even failing. But when you do get into the really advanced populations, that's where, from time to time, and certainly I don't think all the time, these intensification methods do become important. And, it becomes highly individual at that point in time in terms of what really seems to be driving results. I think that what we're seeing more and more is that, volume, like excess volume is not, it could be considered junk volume, so to speak. Like, people are doing it, but it's not really driving results. It might just be driving a lot of fatigue. And so maybe you're better off with like 2-3 sets per exercise of just really getting in there and hammering it. And like I said, for advanced people, some of the protocols that you mentioned might be necessary to stimulate a response in those groups.
It makes sense that for those who are just starting out, focusing on straight sets with progressive overload and pushing close to failure is often sufficient to see results. I'd like to revisit your earlier points on measuring progress. Given that methods like DEXA scans or MRI aren't always accessible or practical, and while skin fold calipers are useful, what other methods can be used to assess whether you're making progress or building muscles effectively? For those self coaching, it can be challenging to gauge progress due to daily exposure and, of course, potential biases. What other alternative strategies or indicators would you recommend to accurately determine if a training program is delivering the desired results? Not just for the training program, but your overall program, both in training and nutrition.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that a scale and the weights that you're using in your exercises are about as good as it gets. If you are getting stronger in the lifts that you're doing and whatever rep ranges you're doing, if you're consistently getting stronger, I would be, as long as it's not a brand new exercise. If it's a brand new exercise and it's week 3 and you're stronger than week 1, that doesn't tell me a lot. But if it's an exercise you've been consistently doing and you're seeing yourself get stronger over time, that's a really good indicator that you are adding muscle tissue. I mean, muscle tissue is the only thing that's going to drive more weight on exercises. And the scale is the other really big one. If you're in a surplus, you don't know that you're in a surplus unless you're gaining some weight. Okay. If you're in a deficit, the only way that you know that you're in a calorie deficit is if you're losing weight. So if you're in a deficit and you're holding your strength, that's fantastic. That's amazing. Like if somehow you're in a deficit and getting stronger without drugs, like you're superhuman practically. But I think that, if you're in a surplus and the scale weight's going up and the barbell weights are going up at the same time, you're gaining muscle tissue. And if you're in a deficit and the scale weight is going down and the barbell weight is staying the same, you're doing an amazing job during your fat loss period.
So, tracking your progress with your lifts and monitoring changes on the scale are both crucial indicators. Strength gains, inconsistent exercises suggest muscle growth, while changes in body weight can signal if you're in a surplus or deficit.
It does not need to be overly complicated. Just because these tools exist doesn't mean you need them, and doesn't mean that they're necessarily that much better from something really simple like, weight room performance and bathroom scale numbers. Those are amazing tools that pretty much everyone has access to.
I'd love to hear your perspective on deloads. Are they essential in a training program? What do you see as the potential pros and cons of incorporating a structured deload program, such as doing them every 4th week or 8th week? How do you determine if and when a deload is needed, and what factors should be considered when planning them?
Yeah, I think the pros to a deload are that, I think that with any fitness quality that you could possibly be talking about, there's the sensitivity of that quality for adaptation. That's something that you always have to think about. Like, basically the longer that you've been resistance training, the less sensitive the muscles are to adaptation in some ways. Like if you just take a brand new person, never lifted weights before in their entire life, even if they're not following any kind of diet whatsoever, just by lifting weights, the signal that's being sent from the exercise to the processes that grow muscle, they're going to grow muscle at a really amazing rate. But if they've been doing this for a while, that signal becomes less and less strong. Okay. And they would have to progressively overload to even try to keep the signal somewhat the same, but eventually it just gets more and more blunted. And, there's a general trend to adaptations to resistance training, and it's mostly to offset fatigue. Like if you look at the muscle fiber types during resistance training protocols for periods of time, the muscles shift over to being more and more type 1 or slow twitch, which is great if you're trying to offset fatigue. Now, when you see someone put a deload in, what happens is you'll actually get this overshoot in the other direction of the muscle fibers towards becoming more fast twitch than they were before you started. This is something that, Olympic sprinters have done for a long time as well, is like using deloads and taper periods leading up to competition, because the training makes you more slow twitch, but then the off period of time, boom, it catapults you in the other direction. So, what we kind of know is that the more fast twitch a fiber is, the more responsive it is to resistance training stimulus. So that's sort of physiologically, we see it become more slow twitch, and that would indicate that it's becoming less sensitive to resistance training stimulus. But if I can deload, boom, I sort of reshift it back towards this fast twitch sensitive profile. That could be a great reason to do it. Now, the con to it is that there's only so much time that we have to sort of like make hay. There's only 52 weeks a year, and I think that the more that I train, the more I appreciate, like, a training year is not a very long period of time. I have like one real good cycle that I can go into for growth. I've got one real good cycle that I can go into for fat loss. And, that's about 40 weeks out of the year right there, which leaves only 12 weeks left over for the rest of life and for maintenance and for transitioning and things like that. That's all I've got. I got 2 big runs in me per year from a training perspective. So, how much of that time do I want to spend deloading? I could potentially look at it like, well, I have about, I would look at it tops maybe like 6 to 8 weeks that could be utilized as a deload per 52-week cycle. And, but every single one of those eats into some training time. So it is kind of this question of like, how sensitive do I want to be versus, how much logistical time do I actually have to train and to make progress?
As you noted, the challenge is finding the right balance given the limited time available in a training year. Prioritizing effective training cycles for growth and fat loss while judiciously allocating time for deloads require careful planning. Do you prefer to structure deloads based on a fixed schedule, or do you adjust them accordingly to how you're feeling week to week? For instance, if you have a deload plan for the 3rd week of August, but you still feel strong and not overly fatigued, would it be counterproductive to follow through with the deload as scheduled, or would it be better to listen to your body and potentially delay the deload until you actually need it?
I think that, in my opinion, you're always better off working from a plan than you are winging it. I think that when people start making their decisions on the fly, it's almost always a worse decision. This might be like just me being biased towards military type thinking. With military stuff, they don't ever do anything that's not planned and organized, and they, they're operating with lives, so they don't have the luxury of being able to make mistakes the way that other professions do. So they can't screw up, and no one is supposed to go off script. And I tend to operate that way. I don't ever want to be making a decision that I didn't make like 6 months ago, but that doesn't mean that I can't create decisions based around feelings. Okay. So I could make a decision 6 months ago that says, okay, once I get to the point where I'm experiencing joint pain that is prolonged following exercise, once I'm getting to the point where the RPE, the perceived exertion from the exercises, is beginning to feel like, practically intolerable, that's the cutoff point. And, I can try to streamline this by saying, okay, I'm doing, I'm planning on doing 2 8-week mesocycles back to back. Okay. That's the plan that I've got going on, and that's going to take 16 weeks. And I've got this feedback sort of a concept in my mind. Like once I get to this point where the joint stuff is becoming intolerable, once I'm getting to the point where the RPE is like through the roof, and if I start to see my performance decrease, those are all the major indicators that a bit of recovery is necessary and fatigue management is necessary. And I will have a deload week structured, planned in terms of like, hey, it's going to be 50% of the loads that I was using for this exercise. I'm going to perform half the reps that I was able to get in my best week. And I'm going to only perform 2 sets per exercise once a week for those movements in my deload week. So it's kind of like there's a little bit of flexibility, but everything that I would do is already pre-planned, and it tends to align itself with a timeline that makes sense in the planning process.
By setting up a structured plan, you ensure that you're not making reactive decisions that could be less quote unquote optimal. And the military's approach to meticulous planning does have its merits in many areas, including fitness. Your strategy of having a pre planned deload week allows you to integrate flexibility within a structured framework. This way, you can adjust as needed while still adhering to a planned schedule, ensuring both recovery and continued progress.
Yeah, I'm friends with a number of like special forces operators, and like in the U.S. Navy SEALs, one of their sayings is "swim the plan." So they oftentimes have to do these long underwater swims where there might not like you're underwater for multiple minutes and you feel like you're going to drown, and the thought going through your head is that you should turn around and swim back. And if you do that, you're definitely going to die. So they've planned it. They know the exact number of kicks that they can take. And oftentimes these swims are done in pitch black. It'll be at night underwater without external guiding light. And so they train themselves to swim the plan, because the plan will keep you alive. And if you deviate from the plan, you might kill yourself and you might kill your teammates. So, that's something that I utilize, that kind of a thought process oftentimes when I'm thinking about how I'm going to plan things out. Like I always quote unquote swim my plan when it comes to my training organization and the way that I go about my training days.
That's actually a powerful analogy. So the idea of swimming the plan underscores the importance of sticking to a strategy even when things get tough or uncertain. So we've covered a lot of ground on muscle growth, including the science behind it and the different training techniques to maximize our workout. Now, I'd like to shift our focus to nutrition. Specifically, we know that being in a calorie surplus is crucial for muscle growth, but protein intake is another key factor. There are varying recommendations out there, from 1 gram per pound to 2 grams per pound of body weight. What is your perspective on protein requirement for muscle growth?
Yeah, a gram per pound. I don't. There's really not any evidence to suggest that more than that at that point is beneficial from the standpoint of what's going to grow muscle tissue. And in a lot of ways, like protein basically just stays the same all year. Okay, and then the only variables that change are fats and carbs. And fat this is where it's like, is the athlete taking PEDs or is the athlete natural? If the athlete is on PEDs, they can get away with lower amounts of fats. It's almost like the external hormones that they're taking replace the need for fats. A lot of fats are a major part of the endocrine system. So, it's really just based on whether or not you're going into a deficit or you want to, be in a surplus at that point in time, and you just simply manipulate carbohydrates and fats. Fats for a natural athlete can come down to about half a gram per pound of body weight at the low point, and then carbs can just indefinitely come down or go up. So that's really what you're playing with. But protein, a gram per pound, it just stays there all the time. If you're absolutely starving and you're in a deficit, then it can come up some, because it does have a satiety effect that can be really beneficial, because a diet that's manageable is better than a diet that's perfect that the person can't stick to.
So, increasing protein doesn't seem to offer any additional benefits. As you mentioned, adjustment in fats and carbs are more influential in meeting specific goals, whether you're in a surplus or deficit. And as you pointed out, increasing protein slightly during a deficit can help with satiety and adherence to the diet. Next, I'd like to ask, what are your recommended supplements or the most valuable supplements you personally use or recommend?
Yeah, I think protein powders are valuable. Like branched chain amino acids are not, the research has not been favorable for those. Like those have not held up to the scrutiny of research. But complete proteins like a whey protein, a casein protein, even, the plant proteins seem to be just fine. I just find them to taste like dirt, but if that's your jam, then that's fine. So protein powders, creatine, that's probably the most researched and most research supported supplement that there is. 3 grams per day of creatine monohydrate indefinitely for people seems to be great. And it's beneficial from the standpoint of muscle tissue, but it's also great for like preventing Alzheimer's and other cognitive things that are amazing. So there's like no downsides except for like some random 0.001% of the population that's got some funky genetic thing, but that's like almost not worth talking about. And then the other one that I think is really beneficial is caffeine. Caffeine from an endurance perspective is a tremendous performance enhancer. There's practically no downside to caffeine for most people. It's generally speaking, it's pretty great. It's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Humans seem to do just fine with it as a substance. And if you're serious about your body composition, you're probably dieting at various points of time. And if you're dieting for extended periods, you realize like how fatiguing that can be. And caffeine can kind of be your lifesaver in those periods.
Shameless plug, but for those who are looking for a high quality option, Athlete's protein powder stands out with only 124 calories and 24 grams of protein per serving. And if you're considering creatine, Athlene's creatine monohydrate is a solid research back option. And for a boost of caffeine, Athlene's Athlene's active pre-workout offers a powerful endurance enhancing option to help power through intense training session. Thank you so much, Dr. Davidson, for sharing your insights today. I've truly been enlightened by our discussion, and it's been incredibly productive for us, and we are deeply grateful for your expertise. And before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our community?
Well, just based on the conversation, the questions that you're asking, you guys, you're definitely highly educated on this stuff. You're living the life. You're doing it. So, I wouldn't downplay your education too much and your abilities and all that stuff. I've never been to the Philippines. I'd love to come sometime, but I don't think that I've been in the U.S. I've been in Europe. Like most people exercising in both of these places, they don't really know what they're doing. They're not that far ahead of anything. So, I can recall the first job that I had. I went to a very prestigious school where I did my PhD, and my first job was at another school. And I got there, and the other professors were like, "Well, don't expect the kids here to be at the same level as where you were just at as a student." And so, I kind of said, like, I don't believe in that. All right. And I made the hardest, most challenging, rigorous course material that I possibly could for this new school. And what happened was that the students rose to the challenge. And I don't believe that any group of people is necessarily disadvantaged inherently. I think that the fact that you can be challenged is actually an opportunity to be tougher and to have more resolve and to be able to push harder than people that have it easier. Having it easy and being comfortable, I think, is the worst thing that could possibly happen for people. Being hungry and wanting something and having the fight and the tenacity to want to prove it is always the place that you want to be operating from. That's where it's at. That's the good stuff. So I think that if you are a person, it doesn't matter what circumstances you're in. The only thing that matters is the drive and the direction that you can move in from where you are currently. You know, people are capable of doing amazing things, but they usually can't do amazing things on day one. All you have to do on day one is the best that you can with the current place that you're in. And on day two, you come back and you do a little bit more and you do a little bit better. And on day three, you do a little bit more and you do a little bit better. And if you continue that process in an organized and a productive manner, you know, by day 170, amazing things are starting to happen. By day 3010, it's like, you know, the most unbelievable thing in the world. So don't let your circumstances and your current story of who you are be the end all be all of your belief system. If you simply take action and initiative and push forward, you're going to be able to see unbelievable things happen and changes take place that you didn't think were possible.
Reflecting on the concept of delayed gratification, it's clear that it applies just as much to our fitness journey as it does with other aspects of our lives. We can't expect instant results after putting in just a week of effort. True progress comes from patience, consistency, and fully embracing the process. Each day in this journey offers valuable lessons, whether our goal is to look better, feel healthier, or simply just live a better life. The key is to stay committed and recognize that hard work often provides visible results. It's about celebrating, the little efforts, the daily efforts, and understanding that every challenge is a step towards improvement. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Davidson, for sharing your expertise with us. We genuinely appreciate your time, and we are excited that we have had a guest of your caliber. We look forward to the possibility of having you back again in the future.
Oh, it'd be a pleasure for me to do that. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you guys for tuning in with us in our first episode. Make sure to follow us in our social media accounts to keep posted kung sino yung mga i-feature pa namin. Yes, nagtagalog. So, we will be featuring both local and international guests in this podcast. So, I hope you guys continue supporting us, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Kasi ako personally, ang dami kong takeaways from Dr. Davidson, and I continue to look forward to learn more sa mga guests natin. So, yeah, see you on the next episode.